Scott Conkright, and welcome to the Meaningful Happiness Podcast, where we talk about feelings, affects, the biological basis of emotions, and all those things that have to do with making life meaningful and happy. Hi, welcome to Meaningful Happiness. I am Scott Conkright, psychologist and founder of Meaningful Happiness and the Relationship Workshops, also the originator of chronic shame syndrome. Today I have my friend Robert Spano, who's known for many things. I did not come up with a list for all the things that you're famous for. Among them, I think 20 some years at the Atlanta Symphony Orchestra.
Yes.
I know you've got a couple Grammys. I know that you've composed music because one of the pleasures of my life has been being around you while you were writing some of that. And you're now at the Kennedy Center. But you might want to add whatever you like to that. And also might want to say why you come on my show, other than my begging you and pleading and buying you dinner.
Well, I was very intrigued when you wanted to talk about issues of shame in the world of music. And I know so little about Tompkins' theories of shame, but I know much of what you've told me. I've also, of course, done a little bit of reading and a little bit of online research, and I'm fascinated with the potential for understanding that's clearly available there. And so I come without knowledge, but with a lifetime of experience in a world of performing where those issues are clearly part of the picture.
Right.
I guess I'm banking on when I took a particular chair at Emory University, I was taking the place, I was succeeding Salman Rushdie. And I said, what am I supposed to do? I had the pleasure of meeting him, and I've always admired his writing, and I was thrilled to meet him. But I said, what am I supposed to do when I'm meeting with business majors and medical students and philosophy students and literature students? And this is all way outside of my world of expertise, if it's that. And he said, oh, don't worry about it. Share from your experience, and they'll figure out how to connect the dots. So I'm kind of banking on that with this conversation, because my knowledge of what you're so well versed in and talking about is so minimal, but my experience might have a role to play in understanding some of it that I found to be true with business majors, for example.
Okay.
I don't know what they were getting out of it, but
they got something, or at least they faked it and lied to you.
Yeah, I would share hierarchical models of the way an orchestra works and how
they would smile
leadership works, and they seem to be able to make sense of it. So I'm taking Rushdie's lead again.
Fantastic. Well, thank you. Thank you for being here.
No, it's a pleasure.
One thing I can add is that we've had many conversations in this room, not lit up like this, but I'm usually sitting over there, you're sitting over here. And yes, I mean, I know more about affect theory than you do, but you know so much more about music, but it's never kept either of us from conversing in ways in which we both think we're experts at that moment.
I think we've both often been full of ill-informed opinion.
And why not add some more here? So I think that's what we're going to do. I hope not too misinformed, but one of the things I remember, excuse me, is a few months ago, I think we were on the phone, and I think you were in Aspen, and I was talking to you about maybe something I was writing, maybe finishing up an article, and you stopped me and at one point said, you know, I wanted to thank you for bringing this stuff up, because I'm really attentive now working with the conductors that I'm working with and how shame plays out in this. And I thought, well, that makes me feel really good. It feels like there's an impact there. And a good friend of mine, Matt, is a psychologist who works a lot with shame with musicians and runs a group for musicians in Colorado. And then, of course, our friend Logan. They talk about it a lot as well, that how shame plays out and sometimes messes up music in the sense that the enjoyment or the pleasure of the music. So this might be an opportunity right now for me to give a unique, the unique definition that Tompkins has, which is so out of the ordinary. Most people don't think of shame in the way that he does. And so when I think it took me a while, and I'll take full ownership of it, but it took me a while to explain that to you. And when you got it, you went, oh, got it. I'm glad you did, because it's really impactful. So basically, we have two positive affects. We have two ways to connect in positive ways with other people, biologically based. The first one, and they're on a continuum, interest, excitement, which includes desire, exploration, moving, anything that captures your attention, things that are moving. It's a trigger. It's a trigger that then at a certain point we have memories and we have cognition, and we start telling stories about these affects. Those become emotions. The other positive affect is excitement, joy. So if a good example is if all of a sudden you had to cancel tonight, I would have an involuntary, I'd be like an involuntary swim. I was like, oh man, what a shame, what a bummer, what a shame, right? So his definition is basically anytime there's a hindrance, a barrier to the two positive affects, there is going to be shame. There's going to be the triggering of shame. Now, depending on your history of shame, and you don't have to be an expert in this because we're all experts in shame. We all have a lifetime expertise in shame. Once the trigger is set off, depending on our history of shame, we're going to go different places with it. We're going to beat ourselves up with it. We've got maybe learn to ignore it, maybe learn to not go down the rabbit hole after it gets triggered. My understanding from, if I heard it correctly from you and others, is that there's so many demands, especially in classical music, and I'm sure in many professions, where the enjoyment and the interest gets interfered with because you feel like you can never get to the place you want to with it. And that sometimes the instruction around it can be shaming as well. And so you have this enormous investment of sometimes of a lifetime in learning an instrument, which you have, if nothing else, a very mixed relationship with. That is causing you anxiety, it's causing you shame, but it's your life, it's what you love. Am I anywhere close to have understood some of our conversations around that?
Yeah, I think I know what you're talking about. And I remember not so long ago when we were discussing this, there's the issue of, and I don't mean to pretend to speak clinically, but from a layman's perspective, there's an issue of identity, that
Right.
There's an investment of self in the activity for most professional musicians, that it has a great deal to do with a sense of self and a sense of one's worth is one's engagement with music. And that, I think, tends to happen with most musicians who, it's very rare for someone to become a professional musician without having studied as a small child.
Right.
And most musicians begin early on in life, and so it's wrapped up in the burgeoning identity of development almost inextricably. It's very hard to unwind. Who am I if I'm not a pianist, for example?
Because all your formative years were with
this
the piano or a violin.
this relationship to the musical instrument, to the music making, and sense of accomplishment and worth are really wrapped up in it. And so I think that's germane to what you're talking about.
Yes.
And and I think it's very real. And there's also the other response I had to what you were just throwing out there that we've talked about on other occasions, is the kind of training, which I don't think is necessarily unique to music, but it's the arena on which I've observed it can be quite abusive, demanding, and purposefully shaming. I know lawyers who feel that certain kinds of instruction in law school can feel very shaming, and I think there's a history of that in the classical music world as well. The kind of authoritarian, hard-ass teacher who's going to demand things of you that you can't necessarily deliver immediately, and some shaming around not being able to.
Right, because you can't really attain, you can't reach the positive affects that you want to. And of course, what I'm trying to really emphasize is that there's an involuntary biological response to that then becomes a psychological one.
I can't remember the precise point we talked when I was in Aspen, but certainly something that's related, if it wasn't the incident that I had in mind. I had a particular student that over the first few weeks, it became very clear to me that there was a lot of trauma in their
I think I remember your
life.
Yeah.
And I do, in my own limited way, try not to shame my students as a educational tool.
Sure.
But
Good. I'm glad to hear that.
But to avoid it, you know,
Sure.
I try to never shame them, even when it's clear that you're going to be pointing out things that aren't working or are deficiencies or needs to be fulfilled, and trying to do that without shaming them. And with this particular student, I became acutely aware of how carefully I needed to tread in what I said. And I remember a day, and a lot of our work is public because conductors' work is public, and in the
So you always have an audience.
yes,
Yeah.
and if nothing else, the audience of the orchestra.
Good point. Right.
So a lot of our work in Aspen is with the conductors in front of the orchestra, and I'm publicly interacting with everybody in the room in their facilitating their process. So I remember a day where I asked him a question, and he said, "That's a trick question." And
It's
that
a trick question?
That's a trick question.
Interesting. Okay.
And I had to assure him, I'm not trying to trick you. I'm not trying to embarrass you. It's not a trick question. It's an answer that you need to find for yourself, and I believe you can find it right now. I'm not trying to trick you.
Okay.
And it confirmed for me that my suspicion about his particular reactions to input had to do with a certain kind of posturing and defensiveness that he felt he needed for protection. And the nice thing that day was he got it. He realized, oh, it's not a trick question. No one's trying to hurt me here.
Yeah. So your intentions were not bad. He finally figured that out.
Finally realized, no, that's not what's happening here. And I can answer this question and move on, which he then did, which was great. But for me, that was emblematic of the kind of practical application of even a very limited understanding that I've gleaned from you and a little bit of reading about how these things can activate and flare up. And to me, that's what I found so interesting. There was I don't remember which university, but the philosophy department had T-shirts made. Well, that's all very well in practice, but does it work in theory? So
Right.
I'm always looking for how these theoretical understandings can be put into practice.
Correct.
And
It's important in my field as well. 'cause
and
it's-
I thought that this was that particular example for me was very meaningful, that I was able to even take this limited understanding of this affect theory and apply it in a real life situation where I was actively trying to avoid that shaming that so easily happens, I think, even not necessarily intentionally.
This allows me to make an important distinction here around shame. And I think your story is great for this because you still had to, I'm not sure what he might have seen as a trick was, but you were trying to give him some feedback about how to do things better because he wasn't doing it the way you thought he should be doing it. And your job is to make that correction. That's true with parenting and education always. And shame is that message for us, that built-in evolutionary message that says, you're not getting what you want. Take a look at this. It doesn't feel good. If you want that connection, you're going to have to do something different. Now, if every time you do something wrong, growing up, let's say, it's extreme shame, where it's moralistic shame, you end up feeling like you're a bad person as opposed to not using good conducting technique. You're a shitty human being, and that starts at a young age. Anytime there's a potential for a trigger, like in this case, he is going to get bristly, okay, until he learns from you otherwise that you're going to use the minimum amount of shame to get the job done, which it sounds like what you did. And maybe even use some humor or some way to connect with him to say, use a little honey with the medicine. And it went down a lot easier. What happens is, I think you jokingly, when teaching me the piano, said, I'm going to get a ruler out and smack your fingers. Because that happened in the old days, that happened, not too long ago in schooling as well. I still have patients that tell me stories in various schooling situations where there was corporal punishment or putting the dunce in the corner, those sort of things, where you're made to feel like an awful human being in an extreme. And that goes to the core of your being. There's what I'm trying to say often is if that is how you're raised and that is your history of shame, it's such a powerful negative feeling that there's no way to not see the world except through that lens. Like every person you meet has the potential of putting you down. And so anything that happens can be viewed as a potential to shame you.
Now, am I wrong to suggest there's a intimate link between shame and worth?
Oh, absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
That's not that's not
Yeah,
misguided. There's and that worth issue then becomes existential even more than performative. It's not that just I'm doing this badly. I'm doing this badly because I am worthless.
Right.
Is a corollary, right?
Exactly. I'm going to take the risk here of sharing something that I worked on last night that I've not run by anybody else yet, so it's raw. But when I was doing some writing last night and thinking about this very issue, about like what is shame really, what I came down with is it's basically any time that we have agency and we're effective in agency, learning the violin, learning the piano, we have competency pleasure. Okay. At a young age, look, Daddy, look, Mommy, I can do this, is competency pleasure.
Mm-hmm.
When a parent says, well, that's good, but we need to do, the dishes go actually like this. Oh, okay. Like, oh, okay, I didn't know that. You do the minimal amount, they do it right the next time. Their agency around wanting to do the dishes correctly and please mom and dad, or dad and dad, or whoever, is met. If agency is interrupted, agency is about getting positive affect, right? That's my theory. We can debate about this. So it's actually more fundamental to one's existential self than I think Tompkins got at. So anytime there's an interruption around your sense of agency, it's going to cause shame, which is usually defended against with anger or withdrawal.
You're reminding me of my nephew at a young age desperately saying on any number of occasions, I can't work it.
I can't work it.
I can't work it.
Yeah, that sounds.
Which then means I
my
don't have the agency.
is not getting this done.
Yeah.
So I think there may be other writings around this. I have not had a chance to look at any of the research it, but it seemed to make sense to me. I mean, it seemed to make sense around how shame worked, because what we want more than anything else is I can do this.
You know, this, for all the talk that's there in the world about the draconian history of pedagogy and classical music, there's a beautiful quality that happens in something if one is applying oneself to a musical discipline that actually bolsters one's sense of agency. And it's that beauty of I can't do it now. 2 weeks later, I can.
Yes.
And there's something very powerful about that internal mechanism in this. I'm sure that's true in any number of other enterprises. But I know it through music. I remember when I was aspiring to be a conductor, an important aspect of that training is the ability to hear a score when you read it.
Okay.
An orchestral score. And to hear an orchestral score when you read it is no mean feat, because it's a very complex set of hieroglyphics and involves a tremendous amount of information. Not only do you need to take that information in, but then you need to translate it from sight into sound. So there's also a synesthetic requirement internally. So it's quite a feat, and there are time-tested gratis ad Parnassum, you could say, steps towards Parnassus that one can take to develop the skill.
Okay.
And I remember engaging those exercises, essentially, which have to do with learning clefs and learning solfege and playing at the piano while singing and increasing the number of lines one is trying to ingest at the same time. And I remember vividly, after maybe a month, feeling really despondent that what am I, at my age, I have no agency for this. I'm a failure. I have no worth. I'm terrible at this. I'm still no good. It's been a month.
And this was when you were 14 or something like that?
No, I was older by then. I was 19 or 20.
Okay, well, you were so old.
Not so old.
Not really.
Very old. So at that point, I went back to the exercises I had started with a month before, and they were easy. And when I had started down this path, they were very challenging and difficult. And I suddenly had this realization, wait a minute, I'm cumulatively
It's sinking in.
increasing my agency.
Yep.
But I didn't feel it because it's happening so incrementally. But now that I compare what was a month ago to now, which gave me tremendous energy to pursue the course, to stay with the course of study, which is rigorous and deflating, because it's so hard along the way. And
you have to have some reward, or you're not gonna put in the effort.
Right, you give up.
Yeah.
And so that moment for me was revelatory for something that I guess I hadn't seen so squarely that was always true. And you start practicing something, you can't play it, and a month later you can. You know that in your own experience with the piano.
Right.
Things evolve and change. But at a snail's pace sometimes, or feeling like a snail's pace. And it's so easy then to turn that into, I can't work it, I can't do it, I don't have that agency.
Because interestingly, I had two discoveries last night around the agency thing, which I think came after my working on Je ne peux dire and knowing much better with it, and then frustrated because I'll tell you, I know what it's supposed to sound like.
I have to say, I think for someone in your shoes who as an adult trying to do what you're doing, it's another hurdle, because at least when you're a kid, you don't know how bad you are.
Because you don't know the piece by heart. I've only listened to 20 different versions of that Satie piece.
It's in your system.
I go like, of all the 50 I've heard or 20 I've heard, what I'm doing is not like any of them.
And so you smell every aberration.
Oh,
and for a 6-year-old, they don't.
They don't have that comparison. So they're not shamed in that way.
So it makes it all the harder for you, I think.
So it's been a shaming process. And I got frustrated, and I was looking for something else, and I pulled out, I think, is it Tompkins? Thompson?
John Thompson.
John Thompson, the first book that you made me get. And I thought, you know what, I'm going to play that.
Oh, this happened to you.
Last night. It went, damn, I can do that. That's easy shit.
Oh, how nice.
So
it's
I got the same
phenomenon.
feeling. When I can do this. I can't do the Satie yet, but in the way I want, but I am making slow and steady progress.
Right.
And that's, the shame propels you to keep going as long as it's not punishing.
Which is why I've always, in my own experience, my best teachers, who I emulate and wish to carry on what I learned from their example were the ones who kind of hold your hand through that difficult passage of, I don't feel like I'm getting any better. And the great teachers I've had were the ones who stayed with you to support in that endeavor that you just got to hang in there.
Yep.
I remember I was going to Aspen and realizing, okay, here I go. That's my big opportunity to teach.
Oh, is this the first time that you went? Or one of those,
a few years in. And I
this-
texted my violin teacher from college, who I revere, and I said, I'm starting up Aspen. I'm thinking of you because I'm just hoping to teach with all the grace and dignity and empowerment that you were always able to give your students. And I don't know, I waxed poetic for a little bit. She texted back within an hour, "Are you drunk?"
But lovely. That's a great response.
But to me, she embodied that quality of teaching, which is supporting that difficult passage of lack of agency to agency.
Yeah.
Because along the way, the shaming element is you don't even need anyone to help you. You feel it internally. I can't work it. I can't do it.
But you brought up another good point, which is a relationship with somebody who's there and available gives you the two positive affects that help minimize and transform the shame, because they're helping you sustain the interest. They're also showing interest in your development, which is very, very important. That you basically, they're giving you love, essentially.
Yes, and if it's not Pollyanna-ish, but still, a realistic reflection,
Just showing up
it
to help
feels
you.
it feels so empowering.
It's very empowering.
Okay, yeah, that's not good yet, but you're so much better. You just got to keep.
I know
at
you
it.
can do it. I know you. Come on, try it again.
You
One
just
more
gotta
time.
keep at it.
And eventually, the other aspect of the other positive one is that, as difficult as it is, and as shaming as painful as shame can be, even if it's self-created, with somebody else there, it's still more enjoyable. If they may not know the theories around shame, but they might get it at a relationship level and say, I know it's tough, but when we're done with this, let's go out for a glass of wine, let's go do this or that. They put in some reinforcements, and in the relationship, making it worthwhile to do. We know in teaching that those who get more tutoring and oversight around their training, around their whatever first grade versus college, do much better.
Well, I have to say, that's another beautiful thing in the field of classical music, is this rich history of one-to-one transmission. It's incredibly powerful if you have an empowering teacher as opposed to a abusive one.
Right.
And it's I don't know many professions that have this cultural history of that one-on-one transmission.
I think in the arts,
It happens, right?
I think. Oh, well, isn't that what guild training was back in the day? I'm not sure.
The guild situation, in my limited understanding, was a little different, in that you have a group that's working together.
Yeah.
But this intimate kind of teacher-student one-on-one training is, I think, a little different from the way the guilds were working. Certainly the medieval guilds, to my understanding, had a little bit of a different quality about them, but maybe equally powerful and beautiful. If I've got a studio with 6 apprentices and everybody's working together, that creates a certain dynamic. And in fact, in my training as a musician, there was this powerful one-on-one transmission, but there was also what were called master classes, when the whole group of students of any given teacher convene for a session as a group. So there was this inclusion of that kind of guild, what I would conceive of as a guild approach at the same time.
So even if you have peers that are part of the same school, like think of the Da Vinci School,
Exactly.
that sort of thing, is that you may not get a lot of one-on-one, but you still have others sub-tutors
Right.
who give encouragement, some who you might like better than others, but you're not as likely to withdraw in shame
Mm-hmm.
or be able to easily.
Mm-hmm.
One of the problems right now, especially in the culture of the United States, as I'm seeing it, is that we live so far away. It's so far. All I'm trying to get at is that it is easy to isolate into your own room, into your own place, where other cultures that's harder to do. So, for that reason, when there's a lot of shame, you see increase in alcoholism, drug abuse, and other sorts of things like that, compulsive behaviors, as a way of feeling better, because those things temporarily make you feel better.
Mm-hmm.
Shame is so toxic, you'll pretty much do anything to feel better for a while. So in our culture now, we have another form of shame, which is social media. Without any shame.
Yes.
But I'm trying to think, if it comes to you, let me know.
Let's take your term, because it
Chronic shame
on
syndrome.
its face, it sounds like what I was trying to tap into, which is when you're debilitated and the shame has taken over your ability to function. Is that accurate?
I would not to function. You can function almost pretty well, except that what I think of how I'm defining chronic shame syndrome is that it's so pervasive at a low level that it affects your assumptions, your expectations of your relationships.
Okay, so you're only functioning, and no more so than that.
Right.
Okay.
And it's kind of like chronic lower back pain. I'm dealing with that right now. It's like on a scale of 1 to 10, it's like a 2 or 3. It might get higher at times. It might get low,
But
down
it
to 1 or
stays
10,
with you.
But it's part of my life right now, until it goes away.
Yeah.
And it keeps getting exacerbated right now with social media. I think it's been certainly brought up to I think there's more chronic. I think it's more chronic. There is more chronic shame syndrome issues now because of social media. But it also gets reinforced all the time. And it's a little bit like alcoholism and drugs, which is, it feels good to be distracted because you get interest, excitement, enjoyment, joy, depending on what you're looking at, but you don't get agency.
Can I make a little left turn here, which I don't think is out of nowhere? I think it's somewhat related.
Go for it. Yeah.
Is there a role, or is there a way to distinguish that role where shame has a positive mechanism in one's evolution or evolving, or
certainly,
it's
a great
and
question.
What would that be, and how do we distinguish that kind of shame, which is, in my head, I would call it valuable remorse of conscience, which is, to me, different from guilt or shame, but it might have something to do with shame, and how to parse that positive thing that we all need from the debilitating thing that we all want to disengage from.
It's a great question, because where you see shame the most is in relationships. The more intimate a relationship gets, the more possibility there is for shame. The more intimate it gets means the more expectation there is that you're going to get more and more interest, mutual interest, and mutual enjoyment. And you're also going to make the assumption that, hey, you like me because I'm the source of your enjoyment and interest. And it's the same for me. Like, I want to be the source of interest. You want me to be the source of interest. As long as that's mutual, which in friendships and when people fall in love, that's what all that pixie dust is about. You're the most amazing thing ever, okay? All that interest, that's what parents are for the first 11 years or so. Parents are everything. They are the main source. By the way, social media is blocking access to parents. We can come back to that. But in friendships, for instance, there's always going to be disruptions in intimate relationships. I've said things that have offended you or hurt you, vice versa. What was a great term? Remorse, self-conscious remorse. But God, sometimes I could be a jerk. Geez, I should have thought of that more. I need to call up Robert and apologize. So it's for repair. So in intimate relationship, there's going to be lots of shame.
What does Joyce call it? The angabite of inwit?
You're going to have to explain that one to me.
I thought you'd help me.
I don't know that.
I think it's related to some old English stuff, but the again bite of inwit, the remorse of conscience.
The remorse of conscience.
Antiquated version of remorse of conscience.
Say for our listeners, slowly.
The again bite of inwit.
The begin bite.
AGINBYTE. The again bite of inwit.
Of inwit, okay.
The remorse of, which most people tend to think of it as being remorseful.
Remorseful. Well, remorseful is shame because, again.
Well, thanks, because that goes back to parsing out what part of that has value, what part of it then becomes unhealthy for us.
As a parent, I often had to say, no, you can't do that. You want to see the slump of shame? Anytime, I think it's even in E.T., where they're watching TV and mom turns off the TV. Everybody goes, oh, Mom, we have to go to bed.
Which is the Tompkins thing of the interruption of enjoyment.
That's the interruption. Yeah, there's a hindrance to what you want.
Mm-hmm.
No. Hey, come on, guys. We'll finish it off tomorrow. If we get to bed on time, we'll be able to do this. A good parent, will throw in some positives in there. And say, guys, you know it's 8 o'clock. Get ready. You know the routine. You use the minimal amount. And when there's disruption, when the child doesn't follow the rules, doesn't go through with what's expected, you use that as an education opportunity. And you give them the chance to feel the remorse, not deeply, but enough to know that something needs to be corrected here. You need to learn how to think this through. Why did I ask you to not play with knives? Okay, well, let's sit down and talk about what happens when you play with a sharp knife when you're a 6-year-old. These are the consequences. This is why I told you not to do it, and this is why you're not going to be able to have dessert tonight. Or there's a consequence for it. And that 6-year-old is now thinking about the repercussions of that. They're now putting cognitive overlay to those feelings and saying, well, I don't want to disappoint mom or dad or whoever ever again. I want to be a good boy. That's the positive part of being a good boy or girl. It motivates one to have more honest relationship with somebody and to do repair work. I'm sorry is repair work. It just says, you know what?
And so
I screwed up.
When does that kind of remorse, if I can just call it that for the moment, when does that kind of remorse flip into, or in what ways does it flip into a kind of shaming of oneself that is no longer productive in that way?
I think a good example.
I would say the again bite of inwit is productive when applied to repairing something.
And that's exactly it. So repairing sometimes means practicing a few measures for longer, because then Johnny comes and says, look what I did. After an hour of this, I got these two measures I can do perfectly, whatever that means now, sufficiently well. And you get that competency pleasure, but also a sense of pride. The opposite of shame is pride.
Yeah, having been raised by musicians, that example is vivid in my memory.
Of your parents, hopefully saying,
whoa, you finally got it.
After all this time, what took you so long?
Yeah, all of that.
Good example is in schooling. Like, let's say a first grader learning basic math. In a school where there's a classroom of 30 kids and an overworked teacher in an underfunded school district. And this kid is not good at math. And he goes to a disruptive household where he can't barely get the the homework done, and brings the homework home, brings the homework back, and is done poorly on it because he has not had anybody to oversee it and help him deal with the difficulties. So what happens? He gets a bad grade. Everybody else around him sees that he has a bad grade.
Mm-hmm.
The teacher says, "You got a bad grade. Why aren't you doing your homework?" "I don't know," or whatever. So what happens? He keeps failing. Okay. Then he goes home with a report card full of D's. Then he gets held back a year. Then he's forced to go to second grade, but his math is still poor, so he keeps getting poor grades in second grade. So pretty soon now, he's thinking, "I'm stupid." Well, the school district now has identified him as stupid. They're not calling him that, but he's feeling that, and they're saying that he needs to be in a special ed class. So are they giving him tutors? Are they working with the parents? No, they're not doing any of that because we're not funding schools enough for those sort of things. So in some districts, so that kid now believes that it's not just he's doing bad things, but he's a bad person. He's flawed.
So that's a great example of how an external mechanism can create that internal state,
Right.
or be a large part of creating that internal state. What about those of us who are supposedly now adult? How would we recognize having transgressed over a certain line of shame no longer serving us, but rather debilitating us? What kind of recognition would happen internally? Because at some point I'm doing it to myself too,
Right.
right? I'm not only the product of, now that I've internalized all that upbringing, I now have ways of enacting that in my own psyche.
I don't know about you, and you don't have to answer this question, but it's very rare for me to get shamed by, people don't go out of their way to shame me. People don't call me stupid. Like, people generally don't say bad things and all that. I'm the primary source of my shame.
Okay, that's where I
Okay.
was headed. Thanks.
And it doesn't take much for me to get going on that. I'm pretty well versed in how to feed my shame. Shame and anger are two affects that love to be fed. It seems to activate every semantic node within the network that you'll say, "There I go again. I did it once again. God, I've been doing this. I'm so stupid. I've been doing this since 6th grade. Like, yeah, I'm not lovable. I'm not this. I'm not that. I'm not good enough." I think I grew up in a very shame-based culture at large. My parents were fairly shaming, not intentionally. They didn't know any better. This is how you do it. Tompkins, by the way, at some point I'll send it to you, maybe put it on the web as well, on the website, has this description of 1950s of this family sitting around and Johnny sitting there after coming home from school, and everything he does at the table, "Johnny, sit up. Why aren't you eating your food? Why are you smacking your mouth? Like, why are you," pretty soon Johnny's just like,
Can I be excused?
"Can I be excused? Well, go to your room. You're not getting dessert." Like, he's just like,
Can I do anything? Anything?
But I read that and go like, God, I don't think my parents were that bad, but they certainly have those memories of school elsewhere. Where was I going with this?
I think you were headed to how those internal mechanisms
was-
live on in us.
So recently I did a couple workshops, one of them online, one in person, and I missed the mark. I mean, they weren't, I didn't get my usual praise the way I wanted. I usually do a great job, and everybody says, "Oh, this is fantastic." I got a couple phone calls saying like, "That was boring, it was too intellectual." I did not read my audience very well. Zoom meetings are the worst. I didn't also realize that on the Zoom meeting, the majority of them were still water behind the ears. They're still wet behind the ears. Like they were right out of grad school. So I was talking like this. And the two, of course, the 2 or 3 people that were engaging, who I started to talk to, were the senior therapists. So I'm thinking I'm doing a great job, so I'm basically talking to them. When I got the feedback, that hit as if momentarily. That hit as if I was told like if I failed my licensing exam. What? I got like a 7 or 8 out of 10, I think. Even if it were 6 out of 10, I did not fail. Okay. Nobody sent in hate mail. Nobody canceled me out or anything like that. But I did not meet my expectations. My immediate response to that, I think because I learned that the best way to get over shame is to be better than anybody else.
It sounds like a dangerous road.
Is that any familiar?
Oh, I don't know. I don't know whatever what you mean.
So I'm like thinking like I've got some work to do now. But for momentarily, I was like, I should just give everything up. Maybe I should just move to Mexico, open a hot dog stand. I don't know. Like I'm not good at what I do. But went down that shame spiral.
Yeah.
Went to bed early, woke up, said, it's a new day. My response, sitting over there, I said, I need to talk about babies, kittens, and puppies around affect. I learned something from it. I'm now talking about babies, kittens, and affect. That's always interesting, and I think it makes more sense to people.
You're triggering another little turn I might make.
Go for it. You're taking a left or right this time?
Either way, around the cul-de-sac. But you're referring to the feedback.
Yeah.
And I'm reminded of something that any working musician deals with, which is the public shaming of reviews.
Yeah.
And criticism in whatever press is doing it. And that is often very acerbic, biting, personal, and
because they can be nasty.
Oh, very.
They can be very, very personal.
And I remember in my own career, the first time I went to LA to the Philharmonic, I was having a wonderful time, I thought. And then I got a review that said I shouldn't be allowed to work ever, anywhere, had no right to be on the podium, not a musician, just the most damning,
ouch,
the most damning response you could possibly get. And at that time, that week, the soloist I had was the legendary Alicia de la Rocha, the wonderful Spanish pianist who, very special. And she was already quite elderly. At that point, when I worked with her again later, and she knew my agent, who was also an elderly woman, and my agent had told Alethea that I was upset by this critical response.
Yep.
And I went into work, and Alethea said, "Get in here, I want to talk to you." She said, "Why are you reading that shit?"
Good for her.
She said, "Do you believe it when it's good?" I said, "No."
Right?
The interesting way to start, right? Do you
Good for
believe
her.
it when it's good? No. Well, then don't read it. What good is it doing you? How is it going to affect your work? What's going to change? It serves nothing. And for 10 years after that, I wouldn't read a review, which is another strange place to be. I could only do that for about 10 years. Because you do want to do, you can't help, there's a curiosity, what kind of response you're getting. And then I started to read judiciously, which I've continued to do until now, sort of depending on people to tell me if I should bother reading something, either because it's so good or so bad or noteworthy in some way.
Right.
But that's another layer of, for a musician, of shaming that everybody has to find some way to grapple with, because there's no real response available. Once I wrote to a critic via the editor, and that was LA again, strangely enough. the LA Times had printed an enormous article on American music, and it, I would say a good third of it was 3-4 pages. I mean, it was a lot of space in a newspaper, you know, those days when they still had print. Yeah, exactly. And his, at least a third of it was devoted to what we had been calling the Atlanta School of Composers and trashing them. Basically, his premise was they were no good because people liked them. So
Oh, they weren't any good because people liked them?
Pretty much. That was his contention when you read it carefully. So I actually wrote to the editor. It's the only time I ever did it, to defend my composers.
How'd that go? How'd that work?
They printed it. It was unbelievable.
Bravo.
But they printed it. What I heard was that somebody was taking vacation who didn't stop the flunky who actually printed it, but it
got there, got in.
Made it. But that normally is not the way that you can respond to this kind of material. And of course now, and you were mentioning online behavior recently, there's this enormous amount of feedback, if you want to call it that, with people unburdening themselves online in ways they would never do in person, which can be so harmful and so abusive.
When they personalize, it then also saying things about your body, your weight, your color, your this or that, which has nothing to do with anything. But it's a form of shaming.
Yeah.
And so people get off on that.
Criticism is a form of shaming, and I think it's related to this online behavior of shaming. And how does one gird one's loins to traverse that landscape?
Well, you have to be the best. You just have to be above everybody else.
I've already done that.
But you have to keep doing it over and over and over again. It never ends. You can't hold that position very long. You have to keep earning it.
All right, but kidding aside, what is the armor that one needs faced with that kind of aggressive shaming?
That's a tough one. You know, I was reluctant to get into the social media world for that very reason. You know, the idea of being that public and possibly getting that sort of stuff, and then the idea of having to spend time engaging with people and responding. And I know that those who make it in that world often have assistants to do all that. Mm-hmm. But it's still an extension of me, you know.
Yeah.
That I feel like I have no control over, zero agency. The only agency I have is not to produce, not to post. How I've done it, how I'm in my mind around feedback. The first question to me is to maintain curiosity. What do I have to learn from this? Just like, why did I get 7 out of 10? Well, let's take a look at that. Okay. How do I? That's the positive part, and that's what the good part of shame. How do I deal with my internalized shame that tends to always that I unconsciously always feed it somewhat? Okay. No matter what, I'm gonna find some way to feed it. You know, even after all these years, it's just so ingrained, which is get myself up faster, just catch myself faster in that. It's like, nope, you can't feed that. Call Robert, call somebody, get on the phone, go with people that you like, get positive stuff, go out of the way to do positive. I mean, not in a fake Pollyannish way, as you said, but.
But if I heard you correctly, it was also a certain internal distancing.
Yes.
An observing part of your awareness that is not caught in the
get hooked.
enmeshment of all of that mechanism.
To me, and this may not work for everyone, to me, I think I have two options. I can either continue forward with whatever I'm doing, whether it's practicing the piano, doing the social media presence, working on my theories and stuff like that. And no matter what the feedback is, and especially if there's negative feedback, I can either continue it or I can stop.
And also your what I'm hearing is that you're trying to exercise a faculty of parsing out, I can use this feedback to my benefit. This feedback is doing nothing but fueling negative emotional loops that I can take care of quite well on my own. Thank you. I can torture myself without that input.
You know, the clothes you wear are really stupid. You know,
It's not helping.
that's okay. Maybe I'll upgrade my outfit, but if I get a lot of that, I'll look at it. You know, 90% of it I can dismiss. Sometimes there's some valuable. If I'm not getting this stuff is stupid, why don't you be more clear about X, Y, and Z? Might think you could say that a lot nicer.
Is there a way I could be more clear?
Is there a way I can be more clear? Probably. I tend towards obfuscation way too easily. I know what I know. And sometimes to be able to put things into words so that other people can know what I know is hard. So like I need that feedback. So I want that feedback. I crave that feedback actually. So I don't mind when people say I don't get you. So well, as long as you give me another chance, let me try again. And that's helpful.
Let me see if I can get why you don't get me.
Yeah, exactly. Because I want you to get me. That makes me happy when that happens. And I learned something. It is still hard for any of us. It's like, how do you get over having bashed your fist into a wall? You know, or when I play racquetball and squash. At least once a week, so I got my back problem, I will smash into a wall or bang my elbow or do something. Acknowledging it doesn't make the elbow or knee pain or my forehead hurt less. It's going to hurt for X amount of time.
But isn't that different internally? At least in myself, I know that sometimes acknowledging something does make it hurt less. Or I'm at least less imprisoned by whatever that is, whatever that mechanism is of
That's
trauma
my hope.
and memory and
exactly knowing about it, and actually knowing the duration in some ways, and knowing one, shame is a biological response to not getting what you want. I wanted to get the ball and get the point. I didn't want to go into the wall. The consequence of going to the wall was physical pain. If I'd lost the game, there may have been some shame to that too. Let's say it was an important match and it was like a baseball game or something, and I let everybody down. We lost the game. That's going to take a while. That's just inevitable. To know that you're having both a biological response and an emotional biographic response allows you to do two things. One is it's going to hurt for a little while because it was a big letdown. My team is not going to kick me out. Everybody on this team has done the same thing. Everybody's disappointed, and the team is going to come together and lift me up. I know that, because that's what we do as a team. The personal part of it is I can look at that and do what I need to nurture myself, because I'm saying I know that I need the nurturing. I know that I am prone to, this is a great way, I'm prone to beating myself up. I can take this, whack myself all night long for the next week and say, like, Scott, this is always, you've done this over and over. Look at when you did it then, look what you did there, like, blah, blah, blah. I'm more prone to saying, this is inevitable, this sucks, I hate this, it doesn't feel good, this is not me, this is not the me I want to feel.
right.
It's not, I don't want to feel this way, I don't like it, but it's going to pass. And the more experiences I've had of talking to myself in that way and then living through it, the more experiences now that I can say, remember this time, this time, this time, and this time, that within a day and a half, it was gone.
That's the beauty of being old, my good poor eternus friend.
Old? Where I don't know.
But I do feel that in myself too. We've had enough experiences to know something from that experience about how it unfolds, how it evolves, how it changes with time.
One of the reasons I'm eager to teach about affect and the difference between affect and emotion is that it changes. It changes the complexity of how you think about relationships with ourselves and with others. And it changed. I love coming up with metaphors. One thing that I thought of the other day is that it changes the soundscape. It's sort of like it's like going from. I had a Zenith turntable that my grandfather gave me when I was 11. Okay, and it was about this big, and he put an album on it, and there was a little tiny speaker on the side. I listened to it for years. To me, it was the best thing I've ever had. It got better, I improved over time. Now, if I put that compared to the system that I have now, night and day. They're both music, they're both sound. Affect and understanding that brings it from a Zenith turntable from then to a wonderful soundscape, right? And that also, there's more movement allowed in there. There's more understanding. There's more ways. And it's not just intellectual. That you now have to say, like, I'm feeling this in my body. I now need to take care of my body in this way. Where am I holding my shame? Also, if you're prone defensively to use anger to defend against the shame, more quickly are okay with recognizing the anger and dealing with the anger as opposed to feeding the anger. Recognizing the shame and not feed the anger or the shame.
So recently we were talking about the solar plexus. And since you were just mentioning...
Can you explain what that is for the listeners? Right, and, just in case.
This might not be the right question, but is it the case that the affects have an affinity with the solar plexus in a way that is different from the emotions?
Oh, certainly.
Okay.
Certainly. Affects are always biologically based. They're always in the body.
And thanks to you, I was researching the vagus nerve. What's it called?
Vagus nerve? Yes.
And its connection to the solar plexus and how it runs down the spine.
Right.
And it just seemed to me, as I pursued some of that after we talked about it, that what you just said about affect is a critical thing in terms of our ability to parse out what is affect and what is emotion. Right. Because we're going to have a sensing quality to affect, which is physical, in a way that certainly happens with the emotions, but perhaps in a more acute way with the affects. Is that an accurate?
You're onto something right here.
Okay.
So affect, you can never lie about affect. You certainly can't lie about your own your own internal experience. You either felt something or you didn't. Now, you can lie to yourself about it, but if you're talking to yourself, at least you know that you're lying to yourself. And we've all done that, but you go like, I still was disgusted. Or I still was down. I was still ashamed. I was still excited. Because if there were a camera there, especially a slow motion, a camera that could catch micro, expressions, they would have seen it on the face. Just as when we do slow motion pictures with babies, we see this slight drop, this slight slump when they can't reach something. But babies are interested in everything, so it generally takes a second for them to get excited.
And if I'm hearing you correctly, that moment of slump in the infant is the disturbance of the enjoyment that is shame in Tompkins' definition.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. It's a motivator then to say, that's not working, bummer.
I don't have agency.
I don't have agency. But I got this one. I'm proud. Okay? Mm-hmm. With all the reactions, all 9 affects, you can't lie about them. They're on the face and they're in the body. That's why you can watch a movie from any culture that you can't speak the language. You know when somebody's angry, somebody's interested, somebody's enjoying something, when somebody looks like they're about to vomit, that's a look. Emotions are built almost like from bricks or words, a bunch of different metaphors you can use that you combine them with your own personal history to to tell a narrative, to tell a story about what that. Basically, we have stories around all the affects, stories around shame. In a relationship, stories about interest and excitement, enjoyment, joy. If there's a lot of shame that's been experienced around enjoyment, joy, interest, excitement, you can have ambivalent feelings. And so you may, for instance, in a new relationship, meet somebody and get really excited and really enjoy it. And that's a pure experience. You know, like that was true excitement, true enjoyment. You may go home and let's say you're a teenager, and your mom says, "Oh, that Jimmy, he's a jerk. Didn't I use him this?" And you learn all these things about him. He's this, he's that. And I guess I don't like him anyhow. Your emotional life changes. So you can lie to yourself with your emotions. And so if nothing else, that's a good reason to know the difference between affect and emotion. You can rewrite the narrative about how you felt as long as you take it out of the body. Does that make sense?
Yes.
And to me, that's a critical distinction. I mean, you can't lie to yourself about what you're feeling unless you remove it from your body. And so if you want to heal...
What's that book, The Body Keeps the Score?
Wonderful. Yeah, this... I feel ashamed. I can't remember the name.
What a great example.
Yeah, exactly. What do I do now?
Well, I don't know who it is.
I do. It's right. I can see it right
better.
over there. It's on the shelf. Vandercook?
But this very idea that the intelligence of the body is something that we can access if we have, is part of that proprioception?
Proprioception is not, this is where it gets really fun and complicated, and this is where I hope I can get people to understand affect theory. Polyvagal theory, which deals with the vagus nerve and proprioception, Stephen Porges, I believe, coined proprioception, which is how we sense what's happening in our bodies at a physical level.
Mm-hmm.
I'm feeling queasy, I'm feeling excited and all that. It is not an awareness of affect. So, for instance, polyvagal theory basically deals with fight, flight, or freeze. So it basically only deals with 2 or 3 affects. It doesn't deal with the other ones. It deals with fear, and it deals with distress.
But is it fair to say that all the affects have a physical counterpart?
Yes.
I thought.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And you see it in the face. Look, track, listen. Eyes wide open if you're interested. Tell me more about what you're...
So there may be a link to proprioception in an expanded sense, that if I am aware of my face at a sensate level, I might have an inroad to what affect I'm experiencing. Or is that nonsense?
That's absolutely brilliant. One reason I'm going to be talking about babies a lot is I'm going to go through a bunch of series of first 3 months, 6 months, all that sort of stuff. In the first year, it's wonderful to watch baby videos. They're always doing something with their mouths and face, and they're fun. That we all laugh at them. They're trying to mimic the faces of other people and connect them to the affect.
They're learning that language.
They're learning that language. That's exactly what they're doing. They don't know yet. So to them, so very crudely, when they smile, that's one reason babies are pure affect. When a baby smiles at you, there is no irony or sarcasm or anything else in that smile. You trust that smile 100%. You know they're not lying. When they're angry, you know it's not a fake anger. It doesn't take long for that to get colored. And that takes emotion. That takes cognition. Yeah, I'm kind of happy, but...
and when does that cognition kick in developmentally?
It's a very slow process, the first 2.5 years. And then once language starts getting laid down, which is
And
about the same time.
Is that somewhere between 2 and 3 years?
That's around 2.5, yeah, between 2 and 3 years, exactly. That's around the same time, too, that episodic memory is taking place. Okay, so you can now remember events. So when an infant toddler is taken to the doctor and gets the shots, it may feel pain if there is pain, but it's not going to remember the event. Maybe around 2 it will. So when you take it at age 3, it's going, I didn't want to do that and I felt bad. And the parent may have shamed that child for crying the last time.
Mm.
So now the shame and distress associated with going to the doctor. So if they act up again and they have parents that are shaming in that way, pretty soon going to the doctor is going to be scary to do.
That worked for me.
That worked for you? So
I
that's why you
hate
never go to the
going
doctor. Okay. It can kill you in the long run, you know. But that's what keeps people from going to the doctor sometimes.
Well, not sometimes.
I hope we can work on that because I don't want you to die too soon. But yeah, so those faces, all those memories, everything about affect starts getting, I don't want to say polluted. It gets not polluted. It gets the opposite of polluted. I mean, it gets now narrated.
It becomes baroque.
It becomes baroque. It becomes colorful. It becomes
florid.
It's now mixed in. It's like when you like a good Corbier, the painter. When he does faces, there's hardly anything that looks like a color in there that is a facial color. When you look close up, it's reds and greens and purples and this and that but from a distance, you're like, that's really well done. You go forward, you go like, you just look at a square. It doesn't even look like a face. Most of our emotions are a jumble of memories and other affects. Okay? Because the experiences that we have will have so many affects attached to them historically. Roller coaster ride, excitement, interest, terror. You know, our curiosity will help us get over our shame and fear if we nurture interest and enjoyment. But we need to train our kids and ourselves what's healthy and safe interest and enjoyment.
Well, I think we're at a little bit of a thread we can bind.
Okay.
In that you use the word curiosity as a key, and my teacher of conducting, Max Rudolph, who was the great pedagogue of conducting of the 20th century, who wrote the book The Grammar of Conducting.
Is that is that up at the cabin?
Oh yes.
Okay.
And I've had the pleasure of having worked with him late in his life. He would ask, what is the personal attribute most critical for a successful conductor? And his answer was curiosity.
Excellent.
To be interested.
Yep.
And maybe that is exactly where our ability to navigate the waters of our affect and emotions and traumas and complexes and lack of enjoyment lies, is our ability to remain interested in ourselves as well as everything else.
Tompkins has what he called, I don't know if he labeled this as such, but it's called the Tompkins Blueprint, which is basically maximize positive affect, interest, excitement, and enjoyment, joy, minimize negative affect, and do everything you can to make the first two happen. It doesn't mean that you don't have all the other negative affects there. That's just part of life. But there's no way to avoid them. The goal is to be thoughtful about minimizing them. Around shame, shame is the most disruptive of the affects for interest, curiosity, and enjoyment. So you want to minimize the shame. You want to recognize shame for what it is. It is a tool. It needs to be there. but it's one of those you have to dose so carefully. You want to use the least amount to get the job done.
Well, forward with openness and curiosity.
I hope so, as always. Follow the Tompkins blueprint. This has been wonderful. Thank you for having shown up. And
Always great to talk with you. Thank you.
it was nice having it on film. Thank you, Robert.